All right, so we talked a little bit yesterday about critical race theory and how all of this outrage that's coming from conservatives is really just completely manufactured. It's one of these culture war wedge issues that they're hanging on to in order to distract from the other issues that are actually going on in the country. But in addition to that, they're now using it as a justification to push more what they call patriotic education, but really all it is indoctrination, fascist, nationalist indoctrination of our schooling systems. And Ron DeSantis has been pushing specifically some egregious bills recently. And so just like how with the November election, and Republicans pushing this idea that there was widespread voter fraud and using that as a justification without any evidence to then push bills all around the country that will restrict the access to vote. Just like they're doing that, they're using critical race theory just as a talking point to then be able to do shit like this. So Florida will require schools to teach civics and the evils of communism. So not the evils of all the governments in the history of the world, not the mistakes and the positive aspects of different various economic systems, just the evils of communism, not the evils of capitalism and all of the wars that we have waged on behalf of resources and money, not any of the right-wing fascist dictators that we have propped up throughout history in Central and South America that have massacred countless civilians, none of that, just the evils of communism. So here's some of the details on this. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis announced new state programs for students Tuesday that will require civics and patriotism education as well as CPR training. So anytime you hear the word patriotic education, that should be a gigantic red flag because again, that's just fascist, nationalist indoctrination. That's what that means. They continue on. It will require high school students to learn about the evils of communism and totalitarian ideology. So again, implying that communism, the economic system, is inherently totalitarian, not the capitalist economic system that we currently have, which is inherently hierarchical and which we have a tiny minority that sits at the top making decisions for the vast majority of people who have no say in something that they spend the vast majority of their waking lives doing. No, couldn't be that capitalist economic system that is totalitarian. It's only communism that is a totalitarian economic system, or a totalitarian ideology is how they phrase it. Then they go on to basically interview a number of people who have fled from some of these countries, and really, I mean, they give no historical context, no analysis, so it's really not even worth listening to what these people have to say, but just as a perspective on how ridiculous some of these people are. So one of them said, hearing her granddaughter speak about socialism not being that bad was heartbreaking for her. Oh, it's heartbreaking that my daughter thinks socialism, democracy in the workplace and having more freedom to actually have a say in something that, again, takes up a majority of your waking life in your work, instead of, having a system whereby you just have to show up and slave away and do whatever your boss says. Okay, yeah, but that's heartbreaking for her to hear that her daughter or her granddaughter might be entertaining that system. They continue on. DeSantis also criticized college campuses as, quote, intellectual repressive environments, and argued that previous generations of students could expect to encounter more diverse speech and ideas at school rather than groupthink and public shaming. So I don't really know where conservatives got this idea in their head that colleges or high schools or our public education system is like indoctrinating students to become these radical woke Marxists. I actually am a student myself right now. I'm in college, and if anything, it goes the opposite direction. I mean, at least in high school, I was taught basically that economics was synonymous with capitalism. Not only was I not really taught in good faith about socialism or communism or Marxism in any way, but I was just taught as if capitalism is the default. That's the only thing that exists. All other economic systems are just, little things that we tried along the way that didn't work, and don't worry about it, don't think about it. That's how I was taught about some of these things. I was never taught it in a positive light, let alone even given a full picture of what it even was. Everything that I learned in becoming a leftist and becoming a socialist has been externally acquired from school. It was despite my education, my institutional education, that I actually ended up in the position where I am. So it's a complete opposite of this narrative that they are pushing. But still, again, they're just using this as a justification to push more aggressive nationalist propaganda in our school systems than already exists right now. And so it's completely meaningless for them to be, it's based on a false premise, basically, for them to be pushing bills like this. So they continue. There's a second bill that he announced that will require universities to conduct annual reviews on their intellectual freedom and diversity of thought. He says, you have orthodoxies that are promoted and other viewpoints are shunned or even suppressed, he said. We don't want that in Florida. You need to have a true contest of ideas. Students should not be shielded from ideas, and we want robust First Amendment speech. So students should not be shielded from ideas. My guy, you just said that you're teaching only about the evils of communism. that you're completely taking a one-sided framing of this entire conversation and then turning around and saying students should not be shielded from ideas, except we're going to shield you from the ideals of socialism and communism because those are just evil totalitarian ideologies. That it could not be more at the surface level hypocritical than this. But of course, being a hypocrite is not something that even registers in their minds. So this is the other bill that they were talking about. DeSantis on Tuesday signed House Bill 233 into law, requiring more than 36 public colleges and universities in Florida to conduct yearly surveys of their students and faculty members' beliefs to determine the institution's levels of intellectual freedom and viewpoint diversity. The state university system and Board of Education will be tasked with creating the surveys, which will ask whether campus community members feel free to express their current beliefs and viewpoints. And the law is vague regarding how state authorities can proceed if a university is found to be insufficiently welcoming to certain viewpoints. So it's not insufficiently welcoming to other viewpoints. It's just going to be insufficiently towing the line that conservatives want you to be teaching in your classrooms. It's just going to be, are you doing enough conservative propaganda? It has nothing to do with freedom of viewpoints. As they just pointed out, they don't even believe that communism should be taught from an objective standpoint. They just believe you should attach it to whatever pick X communist or left-wing government throughout history that committed human rights abuses and say that's what communism means. So again, it's complete hypocritical nonsense, but they don't really care about that. So they continue. The law is vague regarding how they can be or insufficiently welcoming to certain viewpoints. State Representative Spencer Roach, a Republican who co-sponsored the bill in the House, told the Chronicle of Higher Education the survey results, quote, could shape whatever action a university president may want to take or whatever action a future legislative body may take. And at a news conference on Tuesday, DeSantis said his government could intervene if it finds universities to be hotbed for stale ideology. So again, whatever Ron DeSantis disagrees with could be something that they then go crack down on without specifying what that ideology might be and suggesting funding cuts should ensue. So basically, they're holding it over the heads of teachers that they may be fired, they may be defunded, their schools may be defunded if they are going to not toe the line of the conservative narrative good enough. So that's what this is, okay? Let's not, pretend as if this has anything to do with freedom of expression or freedom of viewpoints. They just said they're teaching the evils of communism from a completely one-sided perspective, okay? They're not discussing the serious the differences between these economic systems and what are the pros and what are the cons and what have different regimes throughout history, capitalist and socialist regimes throughout history, where have they made mistakes, where have they gone right. They're not doing any of that because that is a legitimate discussion that you can have. You can have serious discussions about the pros and cons of various economic systems. You can have serious discussions about the pros and cons of other previous empires throughout history, like the Soviet Union, like even Cuba. You could have a serious conversation about their policies. You could have a serious conversations about the mistakes that Maduro is making, but they're not interested in actually having these conversations from a good faith perspective, okay? They're interested in pushing a far-right, nationalist, a pro-capitalist only perspective. That's all they're interested in doing here. And really, again, this is based on an entirely false premise because at least for me and my schooling experience, and I live in Georgia, so, not exactly a progressive state here, but at least through my schooling experience, it's the complete opposite of how they portray this. Not only have I not been indoctrinated to become a socialist, but it's the complete opposite of that. Everything that I learned and getting to where I am right now was in spite of my education, not because of it. And so it's just completely based on a false premise. It's riddled with hypocrisies. They claim it's for freedom of speech, freedom of ideology and viewpoints. Meanwhile, they're just indoctrinating kids.